Guys, Mavuika has been out for a few days now, and unless you live under a rock, you probably noticed that she's quite remarkable in terms of damage. That brings up the question, is she better than Molani? Is she better than Nuvolette? Is she the best DPS in the game? In this video I will give you my perspective and I will try to cover all bases to answer this question from a meta standpoint. Let's go. First of all, let me say that the Mavuika I tried for the purpose of this video was a Constellation 0, talents at level 6 and their signature. This is my girlfriend's account. I imposed these limitations on myself because the performance of this Mavuika should be pretty similar, give or take, to a free-to-play Mavuika talents level maxed. My own Mavuika is quite a bit more invested, so I wasn't able to use my account this time around. So, the first thing I noticed about Mavuika is that she's very efficient in terms of attack types. I thought she'd feel clunkier to play with the bike and everything, but honestly she feels pretty smooth, and a big reason for that is that her attacks have massive range. Her burst, the single strongest attack in her kit, will practically always hit all the targets in front of you, but what I didn't expect is that her charge attacks aren't much different. I expected them to have more issues in terms of hitbox and whatnot, but they're good enough in terms of range that as long as you're relatively close to opponents, you can pretty much just spin mindlessly and you'll hit all of them. She doesn't have the kind of AoE foolproofness a character like Nuvolette has, but honestly, she's not much below either, and she's for sure better than melee characters like Arlecchino or Alhaitham in that sense. It doesn't feel like she needs a grouper, and that's great, because her best teams don't integrate Kazuha currently. This type of effectiveness also makes her perform pretty well on teams that aren't her ceiling teams, however. For example, I liked using Monopyro with her. Monopyro is, historically, a composition that performs worse than lineups such as Vapor Melt in terms of raw damage output, but it can make up for it with its ease of use and the AoE potential, enabled partially by supports like Shanling and Kazuha. I have to say, even if I wasn't able to achieve millions of damage on this type of team, it felt pretty great to just throw her into this type of composition and annihilate the opponents regardless, thanks to how consistent she is. Of course, the same goes for overload compositions with Chevreuse that kind of follow the same trend as Monopyro, since they lack the damage amplification of Vapor Melt teams, but they are very consistent in return. Sadly, Chevreuse isn't very invested on this account, so I wasn't able to accurately test it myself. A slightly different discourse to me comes in play if you consider Mavuika DPS compositions without Natran allies. Much like the other teams I've listed, these also have a lower ceiling than our top teams in terms of damage, but the additional drawback here is that they also often play differently because you have to spend extra time with Mavuika on field to generate enough fighting spirit to use her next burst. They are technically still able to dish out impressive damage sometimes, but those instances can easily fool you. While it's impressive to see a Vape team with Sucrose deal as much damage as a team with Shilonen if Mavuika has 200 fighting spirit, getting 200 fighting spirit every rotation with her often means starting rather awkward time-wasting sequences that don't really feel organic to her gameplay in my opinion. As opposed to her, while characters like Nuvolette or Arlecchino will definitely be worse if you remove Furina or Bennett from their teams, they won't really feel worse in terms of gameplay. Shilonen in particular goes a long way in making the fighting spirit mechanic great for Mavuika. Other Natran characters steadily consume their Night Soul points throughout the rotation, and Mavuika will, in turn, steadily gain fighting spirit from that. With them, playing her feels pretty similar to playing any other carry that needs to burst and will recover energy throughout this rotation to use it again later. With Shilonen, things are different, because just one skill from her will already make Mavuika able to burst immediately. Like, imagine if Bennett was able to make Shanling burst with a single skill with her having 0 energy recharge. That's how the synergy with Shilonen and Mavuika feels. Of course, one Shilonen skill alone will only put Mavuika at around 100 fighting spirit range, so not close to her maximum potential, but it felt relevant enough that using her on team made me completely forget of any constraints of the mechanic. I will say that, for example, Mavuika definitely relies more on Shilonen than Nuvolette relies on Furina, and when you consider the single value of a carry, that has to be considered. Still, however, assuming you fulfill the requirements, there is a strong case for her to be the best DPS in the game, in my opinion. I talked about her lower ceiling teams before, but her top teams is where the real fun begins. Both her Vaporides and Melt teams considerably outperform the estimates I made in pre-release for them, especially the Melt teams, because new combos came out for them that make it easier for her to vape and melt more times per rotation. As things stand now, she's the damage ceiling in the game, and it isn't particularly close. These combos aren't even hard to pull off, honestly, and that's partially because her charge attack playstyle is kind of mindless by default. For vape teams, there are a couple intricate ones, but the one I found the most consistent is 5 charge attacks, 1 dash, and then 4 more charge attacks before the finisher. The reason you dash midway through the rotation is because right before that, Mavuika should have vaped twice in a row based on how her standard internal cooldown works. The dash itself will deal damage, but won't apply pyro because of the internal cooldown, so it's basically a way to lower that cooldown amount before the more relevant charge attack hits, and that results in more vapes. For melt teams, this solved a bigger improvement because a charge attack spam creates more inconsistency for melts than it does for vapes. There are 2 combo improvements here. The first is 4 charge attacks, jump, and then 4 charge attacks again before the finisher. You interrupt the combo to allow the cryo application from Citlali to keep up, so she applies cryo before you hit the opponent with a 5th charge attack that will melt, and this will also allow for another melt later in the combo. Alternatively, 3 charge attacks, finisher, dash, and then 3 charge attacks again and another finisher. This gets the same total amount of melts as before, which is 4, but since the finisher has higher multipliers than her charge attacks, it will deal more damage. Additionally, pausing the combos with the finisher seems more intuitive to me than just jumping mid-combo, so it's just better in my opinion. This combo was brought to my attention by Okram, another content creator, so thanks to him for that. Anyway, the thing here is that these discoveries increased a ceiling that was already arguably the highest in the game. At this point, in terms of raw damage output, Mavuika's free-to-play investment will deal more damage than what other carries deal with their signature weapons, which is quite funny to witness. It's not just about raw damage on a calculation board, however. The way it's split is also quite clever from a gameplay standpoint. Mavuika comes with one of the strongest nukes in the game at the start. In terms of power at Constellation 0, it feels similar to what a Constellation 2 or 3 Raiden can do, but with the difference that it can vapor melt on top of that. Damn. It's single-handedly enough to wipe out an enemy wave and then hit the other one with the charge attacks right after, and when this works, it really speeds her clear times up a lot. This, combined with the fact that Shilonen is the perfect multi-wave buffer, as she doesn't need to re-enter the field to reduce resistance on opponents again, basically means that Mavuika has very little to care about in terms of gameplay consistency. One limiting factor, however, is that she can't freely swap in and out while keeping her burst up. While characters like Nuvolette and Arlecchino have a lower ceiling, them having no time-related restriction or impossibility to swap during uptime goes a long way making them feel as good as they are. In comparison, Mavuika is much more restricted with her 7 seconds uptime after the burst, and that often means you have to strategize more carefully than with the other DPS I mentioned throughout the different Abyss floors. Having said this, when her burst uptime ends, she will switch to her normal bike stance that deals much less damage, but still doesn't feel totally bad, because as I said before, Mavuika's charge attacks have a large AoE range and pretty consistent output. Whenever you need just a bit more damage to kill off a wave, those powered charge attacks will be just enough to do the job most of the time. So, while she's no Nuvolette in this regard, she's also much more flexible than someone like Raiden, and that's essentially who she is, a 2025 version of Raiden that is just much better in every way possible from an offensive standpoint. Moving on, another comparison to make is with Mualani, and that's where it gets tricky to me. Mualani isn't a character that looks outstanding in terms of team damage output, but her combination of quick setup and quick combo execution, while still having very high AoE damage, made her the best speedrunning unit in the past few months. Mavuika is lower than Mualani in several ways, because for one, her teams have a longer setup time on average, and she herself has lower animation time with her burst cast in particular. She does have a higher damage ceiling, however, significantly higher actually, so I think this conversation will vary depending on how exactly the Abyss floors are structured and what you need in terms of damage profile. As a whole, Mavuika is kind of in the middle between Mualani and Nuvolette in terms of character type in my opinion, because she has the type of damage that makes her great at fast clears, but while also have the quality of life that makes Nuvolette great in many ways, so she is strong and reliable. Depending on what you exactly look for in a DPS, DPS, she might not be the best for you specifically, because for example, if you just don't want to care about anything whatsoever, Neuvillette might still be better, but honestly, an argument could be made that she's the best mix of both worlds and a standard setter for DPS moving forward. To me, all things considered, if you have a perfect team, she's probably the best DPS in the game, but an argument could be made that since she relies on her best Nathan allies more than other characters rely on their best teammates, if these Nathan supports ever get replaced as the best supports in the meta from characters coming from other regions, then other DPS could age better than Mavuika. Like, let's say Shilonen gets power crept. Mavuika will still rely on Shilonen because of how she works, but other carries can just replace Shilonen on their best teams, so it's an interesting thing to keep in mind. Same case for Citlali, like let's say Tsaritsa comes out, I don't know, and she's a better cryo support than Citlali is, Mavuika will still kind of rely on Citlali for fighting spirit, while a DPS like Arlecchino might benefit more because she doesn't have that constraint. But for now, she's probably the best to me, and all the rest is fantasy. And with this, I'm done for today. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and also go check the guide I made about how to maximize Mavuika on her best teams. Bye bye.